Before Pearl Harbor, the Japanese Navy turned night into a weapon. They knew the Black Ocean well. Their torpedo guys trained blindfolded. Their captains knew ship shapes in the moonlight. In the Pacific, they didn't fear darkness. They owned it. By 1942, they seemed unbeatable. The Japanese Navy sliced through the Pacific like a ghost. Allied ships sank without warning from the Java Sea to the Bismarck Sea. Just flashes and booms, then nothing. The Americans called it the Tokyo Express, which sounded harmless until it started showing up every night at Guadalcanal with troops, stuff, and trouble. At first, the dark seemed to help Japan. The U.S. Navy was lost. Their radar wasn't great, and they trained for daytime fights. American lookouts squinted, scared, while Japanese gunners fired without even thinking. Near Savo Island, for Allied cruisers went down in less than an hour. Over 1,000 guys died without seeing who got them. That night, August 9th, 1942, became a legend, and the legend became the way things were done. Japan ruled the night. But history likes to flip things around. While Japan depended on the dark, the Americans learned to see in it. Back home, in labs and shipyards, things were changing quietly. Engineers were making the SG radar better, which would give ships eyes. When those screens got to the Pacific, night fighting would be different. But in 1942, sailors didn't know this was happening. In the Solomon Islands, nights were still long, and the Japanese were sure of themselves. They said radar wasn't reliable and could never beat a person's gut feeling. Their leaders repeated an old saying, "Machines break, but people don't." But near Guadalcanal, that belief was about to get a reality check. As autumn came, the Solomon Sea became a place where confidence died. The Americans, beaten and embarrassed, started to change. They watched how the Japanese torpedoes moved, timed their turns, and practiced night firing. Slowly, things switched. The dark, once a shield, began to change sides. Every battle report made Tokyo nervous. The enemy got us before we saw them. It didn't make sense. How could they see? How could they shoot before seeing smoke? The answer was a quiet hum and a spinning antenna on an American ship. Instinct was meeting tech. For the Japanese sailors who still trusted their eyes, nights would feel weird. The silence before the fight would get shorter. Gunfire would come from nowhere. The ocean that used to help them would start to work against them. As ships burned from unseen fire, they realized too late. The dark they had owned was gone. Before the Pacific War, Japan's Navy had a plan for fighting in the dark. They learned to strike when others couldn't see. The Imperial Navy thought night fighting canceled out America's industry. At night, tech didn't matter as much. Training and guts decided who lived. From the 1920s, Japan spent a lot on this idea. Crews practiced silent moves all night. Gunners learned to fire without radar, just by feel. Signal teams used lights and flags, coordinating formations with quick flashes. Every sailor knew his job in the dark. By 1941, they were the best night fighters around. They knew how to use the dark to hide and launch torpedoes before the enemy knew they were there. The Americans didn't have anything like this. They trained for daytime gunfights. Japan planned for chaos. The U.S. didn't. The Type 93 Long Lance torpedo made the plan dangerous. It was a great piece of work. It used compressed oxygen, so it was fast and didn't leave much of a trail. It could go over 20 kilometers, more than any Allied torpedo. It hit quietly, and it could break heavy ships apart. In 1942, Allied officers didn't know how these attacks happened. They thought the Japanese were firing from too far away, or that submarines were nearby. Really, one destroyer group could destroy from beyond sight. The Japanese were sure of themselves after early battles in the Java Sea, Sunda Strait, and near Savo Island. The results proved their plan worked. Allied ships were caught off guard, their groups broken up by torpedoes they couldn't see. Japanese leaders thought they were doing things right. They called it Yazen Sanjitsu, or night battle tactics, and thought it was the best kind of naval fighting. They believed people's instincts were better than machines. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto and his people liked tech, but they trusted human skill more. The Americans, they said, depended too much on machines, which could break. Courage wouldn't. This idea went from the top to the bottom. It was almost a religion. When Japan started the Pacific War, they had the upper hand. At Pearl Harbor, planes came from the sky. Near Savo Island, destroyers appeared from the dark. The message was clear. Japan had turned night into a weapon. Even after early wins, many Japanese officers didn't trust radar. They thought a good lookout was better than a radar screen. They trusted what they could see and hear. But the Americans were fast learners. After every loss, they collected data, torpedo tracks, timing, shell paths, and started to figure out how the Japanese were so good. Analysts found a pattern. The enemy struck first from hidden spots. It wasn't luck, it was the plan. By mid-1942, the U.S. Navy started to fight back by getting new eyes for the night. The SG radar, still new, could change things. It could spot ships from 10 miles away before anyone could see them. While Japan trained people to understand the dark, America taught them to read radar. At the time, Japanese intelligence didn't care. They had captured radar sets in the Philippines and thought they were simple and too weak. Officers said Japan's gear and lookouts were good enough. Few knew that American engineers were fixing those problems. In the summer of 1942, U.S. ships in the South Pacific started arriving with radar and trained people. The sailors who used to fear the night started to trust their screens more. They called it seeing ghosts, but the ghosts were real. Every spin of the antenna showed ships hidden on the horizon, both friends and enemies. For the first time, the dark was becoming fair. Japanese sailors still thought they owned the night. They kept moving troops and stuff to Guadalcanal under the dark sky, sure that their night trips, called the Tokyo Express, couldn't be stopped. But things were changing. American ships weren't blind anymore. The next time they met in the dark, the Japanese would learn that the unseen now had a new master. By fall 1942, the Japanese Navy's night power felt solid. Their ships raced through the slot, the sea north of Guadalcanal, in the dark. The Americans joked about the nightly runs, calling it the Tokyo Express. But it wasn't funny. Every trip brought bombs, supplies, and more Japanese soldiers to the island. Every night, searchlights tried to cut through the dark. Every morning, American Marines counted new holes and dead. But something was changing on the U.S. ships. Some had started carrying a new radar, the SG Surface Search Set. It was small and better than anything before. For the first time, American sailors could track a ship before they could see or hear it. It was a small thing, but it was there. Rear Admiral Norman Scott would turn that small thing into a fighting chance. Scott wasn't a big name. He wasn't even high up when the war started. But he had something the Navy needed. He understood things clearly. He knew Japan's strength wasn't just training or weapons. It was confidence. They thought the Americans would be scared in the dark. Scott's answer, don't be scared. In October 1942, with Japanese troops headed to Guadalcanal, Scott gathered his ships near Cape Esperance. He had 10 ships, including the Salt Lake City, Helena, and Boise. The Helena had the new SG radar. Scott planned to use it to shoot first. His officers were nervous. Radar wasn't always right. But Scott told them to track every blip and report it. His command set the tone, we won't wait to see them. On the night of October 11th, 1942, the Japanese, led by Rear Admiral Aratamo Goto, moved south through the slot. They had supplies and escort ships, sure that the dark made them safe. Goto's ship, the Aoba, led the way, followed by the Furitaka and Kinagasa. The sea felt normal to them. Americans had never attacked well in the dark before. At 11:30 p.m., the Helena's radar picked up ships, several moving fast, 20 miles out. Scott's ships turned to meet them. No one on the American ships could see anything, just dark water. But the radar showed enemy ships coming fast. At 11:45, they were 9,000 yards away. Still nothing to see. Some American officers were scared. Shooting without seeing went against everything they knew. Scott paused, then decided to break tradition. He ordered, open fire. No searchlights came on. The American ships fired into the night. The radar found targets fast. The Aoba was hit right away. Goto thought he was being attacked by his own ships. His last words were, stop firing friendly ships. But they weren't friendly. They were American. The Japanese ships fell apart. Shells hit the Furitaka. The Fubuki, a destroyer, was destroyed. For once, the Japanese night fighters weren't in charge. They were lost. Goto's command was destroyed before he could do anything. It wasn't a perfect win. Scott's ships were a mess, and some American shells hit their own ships. But the Japanese had lost 3 ships, and the Americans only had 1 damaged. The idea that the Japanese were unbeatable at night was gone. Radar had scored the first hit. The Japanese survivors felt it was wrong. They had trained to rule the night. They couldn't believe the enemy could fight without seeing. For the Americans, it was more than a win. They weren't as scared as they had been since Savo Island. In Tokyo, they didn't believe the reports from Cape Esperance. They said it was bad luck. But younger officers started to worry. They had trusted the dark for too long. The Americans had learned to use it too. After Cape Esperance, both sides knew the next night fight would be different. The Americans had won a little, and the Japanese had felt unsure for the first time. The Imperial Navy didn't give up on the dark. They tried harder. In November 1942, with Guadalcanal at stake, Japan gathered another group to break the tie. Vice Admiral Hiroaki Abe led it. His job was to bomb Henderson Field, the American air base, until it was useless. If Henderson fell, Japanese troops could land and take back the island. The plan was the same as always: attack at night when no one could see them coming. Abe's group was strong. 2 battleships, Hai and Kirishima, with cruisers and destroyers. To the Americans, those battleships were too strong. The U.S. sent a smaller force to stop them: 2 heavy cruisers, 3 light cruisers, and 8 destroyers under Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan. Many of Callahan's ships had radar, but his officers didn't know how to use it well in battle. It was still new, and it was hard to work together. The night was dark, the sea calm. The 2 groups got close near Savo Island, where ships had been destroyed before. This time, both sides were hunting. At 1:24 a.m., radar on the Helena picked up ships ahead. Callahan's group was a mess. Reports came in, but it was hard to tell what was what. Callahan paused, trying to understand. His last radio message said, "Odd ships ahead, range about 3,000 yards." Suddenly, spotlights came on. The High lit up the destroyer USS Cushing, and both sides fired. For the next 20 minutes, things were so close and crazy that even veterans couldn't explain it. Ships fired at targets less than 1,000 yards away. Shells ripped through ships. Torpedoes crossed the water. The sea became a mess of light and explosions. Callahan died when a shell hit his ship. The Atlanta was hit by friendly fire and stopped. But the American radar started to make a difference. The High, which seemed unbeatable, was hit many times. Her steering broke, the decks burned, and she couldn't talk to anyone. The Japanese ships broke apart. When dawn came, the High was still floating, but damaged. American planes finished the job. By the afternoon, the battleship was sinking, the first Japanese battleship lost in a battle. Over 1,000 of her crew were dead. The Japanese had caused damage, but things had changed. Their best night crews had fought hard and learned that their old ways didn't work anymore. Radar wasn't perfect, but it had given the Americans something they didn't have before: awareness. 2 nights later, Japan tried again. Vice Admiral Nobute Kondo led another group with a battleship Kirishima to finish the job. Waiting for him off Savo Island was a small American force under Rear Admiral Willis A. Lee. 2 new battleships, Washington and South Dakota, had the latest radar. Lee trusted the machines. When the battle started just before midnight, the Japanese came confidently, expecting chaos. They didn't know they were being tracked. Radar on the Washington had spotted them 20 minutes earlier and had figured out solutions before anyone saw anything. At 12 a.m., Lee ordered, "Open fire." The Washington's guns fired, hitting the Kirishima in the first minutes. The Japanese ship was in shock. Lights swung around, fire went everywhere. In less than 10 minutes, the Kirishima was burning. When her captain ordered everyone off, they realized they had never even seen the enemy. By dawn, the Kirishima had sunk. The Americans had lost a destroyer and damaged the South Dakota. But it was a big win. It ended Japan's night power. The ocean that used to help them had turned on them. Every battle after that would be fought with radar. The Americans felt like things had changed. They had fought in the same waters where their friends had died and had won. The fear of the dark was gone. The night wasn't Japan's friend anymore. For Japan, the losses off Guadalcanal were more than just damage. They were mental. Officers who had believed that courage could beat anyone now faced a new world. The enemy could see them before they could react. Tradition had met tech, and tradition had lost. After Guadalcanal, the differences between the two navies were clear. The Japanese still trusted their eyes. The U.S. had started to trust machines. What separated them wasn't courage. It was belief. One side believed they were good from instinct. The other decided living came from changing. Radar was the proof. By early 1943, almost every big American ship had it. Destroyers, cruisers, and carriers used it to spot ships and shoot guns. Training changed fast. Radar people became as important as lookouts. They learned to read the screens like a language, showing distance and danger. Crews started to move and fire without seeing the enemy. For the first time, people fought with tools. In Japan, things stopped. Engineers had made their own radar, but it was not as good, and officers didn't trust it. Most treated it as extra. They liked their eyes and what they knew. It wasn't being cocky, it was believing in the old ways. For 20 years, it had worked. Changing now meant giving up what made them strong. But the ocean had changed faster than they had. At the start of the war, Japanese ships had better eyes, torpedoes, and crews. By 1943, the Americans were better. They could fight through rain, track planes from far away, move ships without seeing each other, and hit targets before they knew they had been seen. To Japanese sailors, it felt like the Americans had learned to bend the dark. Inside Japan's navy, people were upset. Reports said the enemy fired first every time. Some thought it was tech, others blamed luck. Few questioned the old ways. In the Imperial Navy, that was risky. Officers were praised for being loyal, not for new ideas. Many who wanted to change things were ignored. When Japan's radar arrived, it was too late. It didn't work well and was easily messed with. When something was about to go wrong, operators didn't have much training and couldn't fix it. That culture made even Japanese crews confused. Crews were told to see first, which was impossible when the enemy could shoot from far away. The U.S. Navy made things better. Combat information centers, small rooms with radar and tables, became the new center of ships. Officers made fast choices based on data. It was a quiet revolution that changed everything. Winning didn't depend on good eyes, but on the calmness looking at a screen. There was another side to this. Radar didn't just help Americans. It made them sure of themselves. Before, they had been scared of the night. They whispered about the Tokyo Express like it was a ghost. After Guadalcanal, the fear went away. They trusted the machines, and the machines worked. The dark didn't hide monsters anymore. It showed them. For the Japanese, it was the opposite. Every night brought worry. They thought something unseen was hunting them. Reports told of gunfire coming from nowhere. The dark that had comforted them made them anxious. The more they trusted their eyes, the more they were betrayed. By 1943 and in 1944, the difference between the two navies was in how they thought. Japan still valued honor and guts. The U.S. valued steps and systems. Those ideas shaped everything from fighting to decisions. One fleet was fighting with people. The other was fighting with what the screen said. As Japan's night people kept using what they knew, the Americans used radar to track ships for miles away. It didn't need to see. It was the opposite of everything Japan had trained for, and it worked. By late 1943, Japanese night attacks had stopped. Every try ended the same. Found, trapped, and retreat. For those who fought, it wasn't about radar. It was about living. They saw flashes and heard explosions. In 1943, Japanese sailors began to feel something was wrong. Every night was riskier. Crews whispered that the Americans weren't scared of the night. Lookouts said enemy shells came before they saw a ship. They realized things had changed. A Japanese officer said, "We thought we were hidden. Then they shot us before we saw their smoke." It felt like they had stolen the night. Those who lived through battles near Kolombangara, Vela Gulf, and Empress Augusta Bay said the same thing. Radar controlled everything. Americans seemed to know where to aim. It wasn't luck. The dark had turned on them. On the American side, things were better. Still scary, but better. Crews learned to hunt. Radar people sat in small rooms lit by screens. Their hands moved while officers called out numbers. The men on deck trusted those voices. If the radar showed a ship, they fired. During the Battle of Vella Gulf in August 1943, that trust paid off. American destroyers surprised a Japanese force delivering troops. Based on radar, the Americans fired torpedoes before the Japanese knew they were being tracked. In less than 10 minutes, 3 Japanese destroyers were gone. Hundreds of sailors died without seeing the ships that killed them. When daylight came, survivors found parts everywhere on the water. But the Americans had won a night battle without losing a ship. It was control. The men in the radar rooms had changed war from behind the screens. But it was hard. Many Americans said the winds felt weird. They didn't see enemies until after the fight. Japanese sailors were shocked that the night had turned on them. Among Japanese survivors, stories spread about radar like a curse. Morale went down. The veterans admitted that things had changed. The ocean didn't offer safety anymore. For the Americans, radar was a weapon. It also gave them worry. The men in charge had to be the fleet's eyes. If the radar missed something, people died. The night of Guadalcanal had taught them how fast things could go wrong. By the end of 1943, Americans could fight together at night. Radar data wasn't just for ships, but for groups. Battles started and ended based on what the screens said. Older officers thought it was emotionless, but to the younger, it was freedom. No more hoping. They owned the night that had scared them. In Tokyo, the reports hurt. They had believed in their training. But radar had gotten rid of that advantage. The dark ocean had data on screen. By late 1943, even captains said the Americans had changed everything. It wasn't the same ocean, one said. The darkness had gone to the enemy. It was about fear and control. By 1944, the Japanese Navy still fought with skill, but things had moved past them. Their best night officers were gone. Their ships were gone too. The Empire's fuel was almost gone. Yet, Japan tried to take back the night. They tried to attack at Surigao Strait in October 1944. It was a gamble. Admiral Shoji Nishimura would lead the southern group through Surigao Strait in secret. To the Imperial Navy, it was a plan they knew. They had done it many times. But this time, things had changed. Nishimura's group sailed through waters full of American ships. The men knew the risks. There wasn't much fuel. Communication was bad. Radar warnings came all the time. Still, they would attack at dawn. Waiting for them at the end was Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf, commanding a line of ships. Every ship had radar. Every captain had known night battles. Oldendorf's only job was to stop the Japanese from getting to the landing area. His ships formed a perfect trap. It was a textbook setup. At 2 a.m., American destroyers started seeing ships on the radar. Oldendorf's ships opened fire from over 10 miles away. The darkness held silent shots guided by math. For the men on Yamashiro, it didn't make sense. They saw no lights, only explosions. Communication was a disaster. Torpedoes hit the Japanese. The Fuso broke and burned. By 4 a.m., the Yamashiro had been hit. When she sank, her lights showed faintly underwater. In less than an hour, the southern force was gone. No American ship had been damaged seriously. For Japan, the defeat was hard. The darkness that saved them before it seen their end. Radar had erased their skills. It was the last battleship battle fought. Japan's night fighting died there. After Surigao, the Imperial Navy didn't try a night attack. They didn't have the ships or men. Captains who knew night fighting were reassigned. The Navy focused on suicide missions. Night battle tactics was gone. To Americans, they had died in darkness before. Now they watched the enemy fall. The radar became important in war. Strategically, losing the night meant something bigger. The Imperial Navy had believed that they had to win. That belief took them far, but tech changed things too fast. They couldn't give up what made them great, even if it didn't work. By the end of the war, even captains admitted they had failed. Japanese veterans said that they had trained to see in the dark. The Americans trained to see beyond it. The end of the Night Empire was the end of people believing they could master war with their senses. From then on, machines would help them see. When the war ended, the ships of the Imperial Navy lay across the Pacific, silent on the sea. To the men who lived, they learned the lessons of those nights. The Americans had entered the war blind and ended it seeing far. Radar defined battles. One Japanese commander said that they had trained their men to see with their eyes. The Americans trained theirs to see with machines. In the end, they saw more. For many, Guadalcanal was a split between two eras. Before, ships moved by instinct. After, battles became information. Every battle has followed that. The dark is filled with signals. The Americans respected their soldiers who had been strong. They also knew that luck didn't make all things work. We didn't beat them at night. We beat the way they thought night worked. For Japan, the losses were painful. The Navy had its identity. Japan's devotion drove their early wins now stood in the way of why they were losing now. The Americans learned to be adaptable. Radar proved humans needed to think machines were only a tool to use. By the time the ships were found, their stories were lessons from the world-changed rules. The ocean makes use of the people who are able to move quicker and get things moving faster at that moment. The men who once trusted the dark didn't fail because they were careless. They failed because the dark itself had changed and they didn't see it happening. And the world starts moving much faster. For those who still visit the waters around Guadalcanal, the nights remain quiet.